team, I want to express my appreciation for the hard work and time that the jury put into this case. These men and women spent a month of their lives listening to testimony, reviewing evidence, yet they remained alert and conscientious while fulfilling their civic duty by participating in our criminal justice system. And I want everyone to know how proud I am to be working with such dedicated prosecutors, FBI agents, staff, and analysts who support them. Assistant United States Attorneys Andrew Winter, John Doherty, and Julie Allen are outstanding trial lawyers who presented an overwhelming case with precision and clarity. And I am so proud to work with them. I've worked with FBI agents in many cities around the country and, in fact, around the world. The people of Minnesota should know that the agents and JTTF officers working on this case are the finest I have ever seen. They are dedicated professionals, the best examples of committed public servants. In all, we charged 10 people in this case with trying to provide material support to ISIL. One of them, Abdi Noor, made it to Syria and became an important recruiter for ISIL. The 9 left behind now stand convicted of terrorism charges. While we agreed to take guilty pleas of 6 of the men who chose not to go to trial, I am pleased that Omar, Daoud, and Mohammed Farah exercised their right to have a jury hear the evidence, because it is now clear to the public just what these conspirators were doing. Their repeated attempts to get to Syria, even after acquiring deep knowledge of the brutality of ISIL, how they imagined killing and being killed, and how they considered causing damage right here in Minnesota. The evidence of this case makes clear that Omar, Daoud, and Farah were not wayward kids who just got caught up in a fantasy. The evidence made clear that they were not misled by a friend or tricked into becoming terrorists. Rather, they made a deeply personal and deliberate decision back in 2014. They wanted to fight for a brutal terrorist organization, kill innocent people, and destroy their own families in the process. They made that decision on their own, long before a friend started taping their extraordinary planning sessions. In short, the evidence was overwhelming that the defendants knew exactly what they were doing, and that is that they were trying to become terrorists, bound and determined to kill for ISIL. And because of this clear and powerful evidence, this was one of the most important trials in recent Minnesota history. Because these defendants decided to go to trial, we were able to shine a bright light on the problem of terror recruiting in our own backyard. And we must all do what we can to stop it. One obstacle to preventing terror recruiting in Minnesota is the persistence of ISIL. They are reaching out to our youth with a powerful but false message. But there is a second obstacle to stopping this recruiting: denial. It will take the entire community working with local, state, and federal government agencies to stop ISIL from recruiting more Minnesota youth. Many dedicated community leaders are working hard to accomplish this important goal, but not everyone. Despite the fact that 6 men had already pled guilty to conspiring to join ISIL, despite the fact that these defendants repeatedly tried to leave the United States to join a terror group, despite the testimony of 3 men who were part of the conspiracy, and despite hours of tape recordings in which the defendants talked over and over about ISIL and watching their videos, laughing about the violence carried out by ISIL, and plotting how they would get to Syria to participate, some continue to deny that terror recruiting exists. This is no time for people to stick their heads in the sand. I welcome everyone to the effort to combat terror recruiting. And most important, I recognize fully what so many community leaders have said, that they must build resilience and they must own this effort. When the press leaves this courthouse today, you will be greeted by people who are sometimes referred to as community leaders, but who deny the existence of terror recruiting. I predict that they will speak out against this verdict for one reason or another. But I would suggest that you ask them one simple question. What are you doing to stop terror recruiting, the type of recruiting that was so vividly on display during this trial? How will you help heal this community by building resilience against terror recruiting? And what are you doing to stop another group of friends from seeking to join a terror organization? True leadership requires standing up to the wrong perpetrated on this community by ISIL. True leadership compels the community to heal, to recognize what is happening, and to pull together to stop it. I understand the need for families and friends to support loved ones in trouble. But now that the evidence is in, now that the defendants' crimes are clear and unmistakable, all must turn to solving the problem. The defendants and their friends can either work with the community to expose terror recruiting and help stop it, or they can continue to spread anti-government rhetoric. The choice is theirs. Finally, I want to highlight one additional problem that I hope community leaders, family, and friends will all address: disrespect for the court and the system of justice. Last April, when some of the defendants first appeared in court, their initial appearance were beset with outbursts. A month prior, the brother of one of the defendants was convicted for threatening to kill an FBI agent. During this investigation, friends of these defendants made public death threats. 2 pled guilty to doing so. Witnesses and their families were threatened with violence, and people had to be removed from the courthouse. This is unheard of conduct, and it should not be tolerated by anyone. While only a few people engaged in such behavior, their conduct must be called to account. No excuses and no rationalizations. Suspicion of government cannot be used as a reason to threaten lives or to intimidate witnesses. This trial should be a wake-up call. I understand how difficult it is for family, friends, and community leaders to admit that young men have turned to ISIL. But they and all Minnesotans must resist the impulse to deny reality. What we saw in this trial was overwhelming proof that Minnesotans are being corrupted by the ideology of ISIL and seeking opportunities to kill and die for their cause. We can only rid Minnesota of terror recruiting if we work together. But you cannot solve a problem until you first admit that it exists in your home, in your neighborhood, and in your group of friends. Only then will we all make progress in our battle against the recruiting of Minnesotans to join ISIL. And only then will a trial like this no longer prove necessary. Mr. Thornton will speak now.
Good afternoon. I would like to discuss what this case was, what it wasn't, and what it means for Minnesota. But first, I want to publicly recognize the amazing work of the entire team of dedicated FBI employees, task force officers, and prosecutors who were part of this more than 2-year investigation. Unless you've been involved in something like this before, most people have no idea how much time, energy, and effort goes into a complex terrorism investigation and prosecution such as this one. If you were following the story, you heard the names of a handful of task force officers and FBI agents who testified at the trial. However, this was but a small portion of the numerous unsung heroes who worked days, nights, weekends, and holidays in this case to keep this country and all of you safe. Here in Minnesota, there were dozens of professional support, surveillance professionals, technical experts, intelligence personnel, linguists, task force officers, prosecutors, and FBI agents who were part of this investigation. Each and every person on this team played a critical role, and although most of their names will never be made public, I can assure you they personify what it means to serve the American people, and I couldn't be more proud of them. This investigation extended well beyond the state of Minnesota, or the borders of the United States for that matter. We received assistance from FBI offices all over the world, as well as help from other government agencies and from numerous foreign partners. The threat of terrorism is global, and the fight against terrorism must likewise be global. This case is an outstanding example of domestic and international cooperation. I've made reference to task force officers a couple of times. For those of you who are not aware, all of our terrorism cases are investigated by the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which is an FBI-led group consisting of FBI personnel, other federal agents, state and local law enforcement officers, intelligence professionals, and assistant United States attorneys. The JTTF is a model of interagency cooperation, and I believe our JTTF here in Minnesota is the finest anywhere in the United States. Although we have many participating agencies, I would like to recognize and thank the following for their commitment to the JTTF: United States Attorney's Office for the District of Minnesota, Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, Ramsey County Sheriff's Office, Minneapolis Police Department, St. Paul Police Department, Bloomington Police Department, Burnsville Police Department, Airport Police Department, Customs and Border Protection, Immigrations and Custom Enforcement, United States Marshal Service, Homeland Security Investigations, the Federal Air Marshal Service, United States Border Patrol, United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, the Internal Revenue Service, Department of Defense, and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. This case was about 10 men from Minnesota who, with full knowledge of what they were doing, made the decision to join ISIL and, if given the chance, would have committed acts of terrorism and murder on behalf of ISIL. This was not a casual or thoughtless decision on their part. It was a decision which was calculated and reaffirmed numerous times. If you want a snapshot of what was going through their mind, they were truly excited about joining ISIL and committing murder on behalf of ISIL, and this was clearly demonstrated at the trial. This case was not about entrapment or about how an informant or the government somehow enticed or convinced otherwise good or decent young men to become terrorists. Let me be clear. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury agreed. These men made the decision on their own to join ISIL and to become terrorists. These defendants were committed to this course of action and remained committed over an extended period of time. Of all the evidence presented in this case, one only needs to look at the timeline. The conspiracy between these men was fully in place prior to the confidential human source deciding to do the right thing and cooperate with the government to prevent the defendants from succeeding in their attempt to travel, fight, and kill for ISIL and to die for ISIL in Syria. I find it shameful that some so-called community leaders have tried to vilify the confidential human source in this case. There is something wrong when you blame the person who did the right thing and defend those who were clearly in the wrong. The likelihood is some or all of the defendants would be dead and in an unmarked grave in Syria had this young man not done the right thing. This case was also not about targeting people of Somali descent or the Somali community in Minnesota. We are a nation of laws, and this case was about enforcing the laws of the United States. We don't care what you look like, what your ethnicity is, where you're from, or what religion you practice. We initiate and conduct investigations based solely on your actions. These defendants happen to be of Somali descent, and while there are people and groups who want to make this the story, everyone needs to know that is not the story. This story is about 10 men who decided on their own to become terrorists. Everything else is just an attempt to obfuscate that reality. I want to come back to the issue of why we use informants and specifically respond to the almost constant criticism we've heard for more than a year about how it is unfair or that the FBI is spying on the community. Like every other law enforcement agency in the United States, The FBI utilizes informants on virtually every significant case we work, whether it is white-collar crime, criminal enterprise, drugs, terrorism, or any other type of case that we investigate. There are extensive restrictions on how we utilize informants, and the oversight is significant. Finally, on this topic, I think it's important to remember we have over 200 years of judicial decisions in the United States validating and affirming the use of informants by law enforcement. I'd like to touch a little bit on our overarching approach to these types of national security investigations. The FBI will use every lawful technique available to us. The American public expects us to, and we have a legal and moral obligation to do everything we can within the bounds of the Constitution to protect this country and the American people. The FBI operates under significant oversight, both internally and externally, and everything we do is subject to legislative, regulatory, or judicial oversight. To briefly merge the concepts of our overall investigative approach, the use of informants, and entrapment. We don't talk anybody into violating the law, but when we have credible information that someone is violating federal law, we will use every legally available technique, including informants, to develop evidence of these crimes. As I've said before, the American public expects us to utilize the tools we have been legally authorized to use to keep them safe. I would like to thank the many members of our Somali community here in Minnesota who supported us and assisted us on this and other investigations. There are many, many Somali Americans who deplore what ISIL stands for and recognize the need to keep us all safe from this evil organization. These same people, while in pain because a few members of their Somali community are in trouble, were also open-minded enough to trust our system of government, our laws, and our judicial process, and again, I thank them for their assistance. There remains a lot of work for all of us. This threat isn't going away on its own, and I believe it is essential for the community to speak with a singular and unequivocal voice on this issue. This is a community-based problem and needs a community-based solution. The FBI and all of our law enforcement partners in Minnesota will do everything we can to help the community develop a community-based solution. In the meantime, the JTTF will continue to aggressively investigate all credible allegations of terrorism, but to be honest, nothing would make me happier than to have a less active JTTF here in Minnesota. Finally, and this is directed primarily to our Somali community here in Minnesota, there will be individuals and groups who claim to represent you and who will make inflammatory and unsupportable claims about how unfair these verdicts were. They will continue to propagate the us versus them, or more specifically, the FBI versus the Somali community narrative. Please don't fall victim to this rhetoric. The reason many of you came to the United States was because things weren't safe in Somalia. We are everyone's FBI, we are your FBI, and we are trying to keep everybody safe. As I said before, we investigate people because they violate the law, not because of who you are, where you came from, or because of your religious beliefs. This is really pretty simple. If you're planning on joining ISIL or violating federal law, the United States government will investigate and prosecute you. For everyone else, let's continue to work on building a relationship, developing trust, and ensuring you and your families and your community can live safe and secure. Thank you very much.
Mr. Luger?
Yeah.
Do you think these people, these three defendants, should spend life in prison?
You know, the sentencing decision will be made by Judge Davis down the line, and prior to that time, we'll formulate our position on sentencing and we'll communicate that to him. Yes.
What do you, does it say anything to you that since a lot of these charges came out, you haven't heard about any more allegations or any more arrests or any more, that it seems to have, at least on the surface, slowed down?
Well, ISIL's not giving up. So terror recruiting remains a problem in Minnesota, I'm sorry to say. Yes.
There are several men who came up, their names in the recordings that the FBI informant recorded, and they were part of the conspiracy. Are you investigating additional men who are trying to join ISIS?
Because terror recruiting continues to exist, because there are people who are trying to be recruited, our work continues. I'm not going to be more specific than that. Yeah.
What do you believe the U.S. Attorney's Office relationship is with the Somali community in Minneapolis?
I have members of the Somali community I talk to on a daily basis. I am invited to gatherings. We are welcome in the community in mosques throughout the Twin Cities, and that will continue. It's continued throughout the course of this case. Yes.
Will Abdi Rahman Bashir face charges or be prosecuted?
No comment.
Do you think, back to my question on the relationship, does this impact that relationship at all?
I don't believe so. These charges have been expected, and this trial's been expected for over a year. And like I said, on a daily basis, I'm talking to members of the Somali community. We're working closely together. That will continue. Yes.
Do you know how many of the cases in the U.S. have people been found guilty of these charges?
I'd like to say yes to that, but the answer is I don't. Yeah.
Could you get a sense at all for how the jurors saw the issue of, that was raised every once in a while, the issue of entrapment or ensnarement? I know that was something that was loudly talked about outside the courtroom, but.
The jury was instructed by the judge, as all juries are, where the allegation is made, as to what entrapment is, what it is not. They found these defendants guilty despite the arguments of entrapment. And again, if you look at the evidence as these trial lawyers presented it, and quite clearly to the jury, this conspiracy began back in 2014. The informant, Bashir, did not work with the government until early 2015. These people had been long involved in this conspiracy prior to the tape recordings being made, and quite frankly, all 6 people who pled guilty to conspiracy charges said so in front of the judge under oath when they pled guilty. Yes?
Mr. Doherty, during his closing arguments, had said, even if you don't believe Mr. Bashir, the tape recorder, you have to believe the tape recorder. But there was allegations that maybe he could have manipulated that tape recorder and manipulated what was heard by the government.
There are allegations and arguments made in every single criminal trial, every trial I've been involved in. The jury rejected those resoundingly, unanimously, beyond a reasonable doubt.
There has been some roadblocks to the program that we launched, Unimplement Resilience Program. Do you think this will have any effect in spreading that program to the community?
No. The program has been widely accepted by people of good faith who want to stop terror recruiting. It was a program that people raised in this very room with me. And the people who wanted this from the beginning, who want to stop terror recruiting and believe that the best way to do so is through prevention and early intervention, are hard at work.
One more.
Yes, one more.
Do you think this ISIS trial is going to discourage some of the young American men to integrate into the mainstream society?
No. Thank you.